Swales, When Burnout Becomes Reality podcast creator, producer, host, everything really. A podcast that was born out of my own lived experience of burnout and my desire to connect with people who were or are going through or have gone through burnout and share my own experience. And it's evolved from there to also having guests come on the show and for me to share professional wisdom as to how to navigate this thing we call burnout to help prevent, recover, and really transform and evolve so we don't get burnt out again. So this is When Burnout Becomes Reality podcast. Please note that whilst my guests, some of us work in the burnout field and we are coaches, counselors, therapists in this space, that the information we do provide, the wisdom that we do share, cannot be tailored to meet your personal needs and should not be a replacement of going out there and getting personalized help and support from a professional in burnout for yourself. I can't stress that enough. And please, if you are finding you need immediate counseling, I really encourage to link with your a GP, a doctor, to help you with that. Here in Australia, we also have national telephone and online services, Lifeline 13114. And especially if there is any risk to yourself, if you're feeling suicidal, please contact your local emergency services, or national, I should say. Here in Australia, that is 000, and also Lifeline 13114. With that in mind, please sit back, or if you're someone who listens to your pod while exercising or your commute, whatever you're doing, I hope that you find this episode enlightening and supportive in your journey and your experience with burnout. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now. Hi, and welcome to another solo episode of When Burnout Becomes Reality podcast, where I, Shannon Swales, psychologist and lived experience of burnout, share my wisdom on topics of burnout to help with prevention, recovery, and growth. And of course, helping anyone out there with an interest area of burnout, or maybe helping loved ones or clients, other people out with burnout. In this episode, I want to share with you that I was actually inspired by a question that was asked of me in the group program that I run, Wellness Support Space. And the group, or one of the group members, shared that they were wondering, how do I know if I'm getting better? And this sparked a really well-rounded discussion, an in-depth discussion that night. And it inspired me to do this episode and really look into it a little bit deeper, because if my group is asking it, people who are going through burnout and recovering from it, then this must be a question out there. People are wondering too, am I getting better? So in this episode, I've split answering this question up into 3 sections. The first section is, why measure? Like, why is it important to actually look at, am I getting better? So have a look at that, because knowing why we're doing something is really important. So I've called this why measure, but why measure are we getting better? Then I'm looking at, well, what to measure. So in the second segment, what do we measure? Because in the group discussion, this was actually something we untangled a lot, and it was really helpful for the clients there that night. And the third and final segment is looking at, well, how to measure. What tools do we use to look at, am I getting better? So hopefully with those 3 segments, why measure, so knowing your why, what to measure, and how to measure, that you'll go away with a well-rounded answer to what to do to explore that question, am I getting better? So yeah, let's dive into that topic. So first of all, why measure? Why look at, am I getting better? One of the first things that I thought of is that we all have a pretty tricky brain. And what I mean by that is that when we are under stress, when we're even depressed or anxious, which often when we're burnt out, we've got elements of that, our minds are designed to attend to the negative, under those kinds of feeling states, if those are really prominent at the time, our thoughts will align with that. So if we're having that question, am I getting better? And we're stressed or anxious or down or all of them, we are actually not our best source of measurement there, because we are subjective. We're biased at that time. So it's important to look at this topic because and what and how to measure effectively, because what we're going to come up with on our own when we're under that stress is going to be bias. Like if am I getting better, and all you can think about is, well, I'm anxious all the time or I'm down, the answer is probably going to be no. But there might actually be elements that would suggest otherwise, that hopefully as we explore this topic a bit further, it will make more sense to you. But just for now, just know that we have tricky brains. So if we rely solely on our own perceptions of are we better, and we're the ones stressed out and depressed and anxious, we're not going to see the whole picture. Our mind will be skewed or be narrowly focused. So that's just something to keep in mind. Second thing that I want to talk about here is that it's actually in the literature on burnout, and in terms of what has been found to be useful as components of the therapy, the response to burnout to get better, they actually do recommend regular measurement to actually not only screen for burnout, but to measure outcome as well. So regular measurement is scientifically proven to be an important aspect of that recovery process. And in my work so far with clients going through burnout, I really do see this. Like when I use measurements and we measure how they're going, and that they then use that for themselves, you can see when we break it down and talk together, go, oh, when I filled that questionnaire out that second time, 6 weeks later, I was thinking it would be worse. They might say, but, in fact, there were some things there that I didn't realize they actually have improved. So it can be reinforcing, it can be confidence building, it can identify where we're really at and help with that next move. And sometimes even, actually noticing that, well, I'm not as well as I thought I am, and there are some gaps here. So also that opposite too. So it's a great guide in therapy, in our recovery, whether you're working with a therapist or not, to have that ongoing measurement of, am I getting better? So scientifically proven, but also just in my clinical experience, that observing clients going through this, they found it helpful to have some regular measurement, observation and reflection of that, where they're at. The third point I want to make here is that why it's good to actually measure and see if I'm getting better. And this is more about at baseline. What I mean by this is it's actually good to measure, to actually answer the question, am I burnt out? Like actually to get a baseline reading, or how bad is it? Because again, our mind can be pretty skewed. We might think we're burnt out, but actually we're not, or we think we're okay, but actually we're not. So am I burnt out? So I suppose a little bit of a different question, but I want to bring this up here. It's important to measure, and it can help further along to get a baseline reading before or early stages of making those changes, to see where things are at and to screen for if burnout is there and what level and what degree. And this measurement as well also often indicates what areas might need to be tackled. What are the problematic areas as well of the burnout for you, and what might need to be tackled. So that's another reason to measure burnout as well, is to look at the areas of need in terms of change as well. And so those are more like preliminary, using measurements to I suppose help them later on. Am I getting better? If we've done some early measurements, some preliminary ones, we know how bad things are. or where things are at. And then when we measure later on, sort of, yeah, am I getting better? So it's good to have some baseline data as well. And we'll talk about in another segment later how we measure and what would be useful there. Then, so coming back to that, am I getting better? We have those baseline measures, hopefully. We know those areas we need to tackle. So the other why it's good to measure is that we can check if what we're doing, those things that you're changing, whether it be within yourself, like assertive communication, boundary setting, learning to rest, dealing with your emotions, dealing with your mind, being able to let go of negative thinking patterns, whatever it might be that you're changing internally that has led to your burnout, but also externally, which might be job change, or it might be changes to your role. It might be inserting break times. It might be your changing teams that you work with due to maybe, working with colleagues that are not safe to be working with, those really volatile situations. But so it can be those external changes you're making as well, or those internal changes that have led to the burnout. But actually measuring whether those changes are actually helping with that burnout symptom recovery. So yeah, it's, why measure? Because it can determine whether what we're doing, what we're changing, is actually having an effect. And as I think I already mentioned, is that we can then also tweak if we've, when we've measured and we've noticed, well, actually, we've been focused on boundary setting for the last, 3 weeks or whatever. And yes, that's made a slight change in the, the burnout symptoms, but we're noticing they're still ongoing. Okay, what else is here that's contributing that we need to work on? So it helps identify the gaps as well, of what else we might need to work on, but also what's working as well, and keep that going. If we're seeing a difference, okay, let's keep that boundary setting going. So yeah, hopefully that is making sense. Like, why measure? So yeah, just to recap, tricky brain, she's not, or he's not reliable enough, especially when it's stressed and anxious and depressed. It's scientifically and clinically proven to be helpful to have that as part of your treatment program, your response to burnout. It can help with that baseline to determine whether there is burnout here and how bad and what's causing it. So you can develop, know what you need to do to change it. It can then inform what areas need to be addressed. And later on in the process, it can identify whether those changes are having an effect, or what might need to be tweaked or changed or adapted to continue that ongoing improvement, hopefully. And just that overall confidence and objective observations, rather than relying on this tricky brain and thinking that, oh no, things are really bad, or thinking everything's fine. You really have some data that says, yes, things are going well, or no, things aren't. So why measure? Hi, it's just me. I hope you don't mind this very brief interruption to this episode that you're tuning into. I just wanted to let you know about a free resource that I have to help support your well-being at work. It's called the Build Your Wellbeing at Work workbook, where I share 5 key practices that you can implement every day to help prevent or even recover and grow from burnout. So on my shared screen there, you can see my website, which is www.burnoutspsychologysupport.com. You scroll down to the bottom of the page and you just enter your details there, first and last name and email, which then will subscribe you to the Burnout Psychology Support newsletter. So you'll be first to be informed of things going on in the services I provide, but you'll score yourself that free workbook. So thank you very much for allowing me to come in, drop in, but now back to your episode. Take care of you. Bye for now. Okay, so the second segment, wanting to talk about what to measure. So to help us answer this question, am I getting better? Knowing what we need to measure. Now, this sparked a lot of conversation, and we focused a lot on this in the group where this topic got inspired from. And we came up with two things to look at. And the group was more focused on and had been focused on measuring symptoms. And whilst this is very important, so what I mean by here is those symptoms of burnout. So things like that cynicism or negativism towards work, or that sense of detachment from what one does, that lack of pleasure, irritability, emotional, mental, physical fatigue, or soul tired, as some people describe it. That sense of accomplishment or that low self-esteem or self-efficacy. There's lots of symptoms of burnout, low mood, sleep difficulties, all of that. Looking at that and being mindful of, am I seeing changes in that? Am I seeing lessening in irritability, improvement in mood, less anxious, less stressed? Probably hear my neighbor dog there, pipes up every now and again. And this is important to certainly look at symptoms, but we don't just want to look at symptoms. The other thing that we talked about in the group that I shared with them is we want to measure the behavioral changes. So these are the actions that you have taken to address those factors that have caused and contributed to the occurrence of burnout and the maintenance of the burnout for you. So this could be internal factors, things like our self-sacrificing behaviors, or our perfectionistic behaviors, or our lack of boundaries and difficulty saying no, avoiding conflict, avoiding emotions. There's a whole list of things that we can be doing that are contributing to the burnout. So measuring the behavioral changes there, if we're, how's the boundary setting going? How often are we executing that? How are we going with being able to sit to and attend to our emotions? And on the other flip side, not just addressing those factors, the internal, and looking at how you're going with those changes, also the environmental changes as well, and even interpersonal, the changes in relationships as well, because people and places can be contributing to and causing the burnout that you're experiencing too, like workplace bullies, or the type of leadership or management styles in the workplace, or the workplace expectations, the workload and the work type that is not conducive to well-being. So whilst we can't we're not in full control of them changing their behavior, but have we communicated where it's safe to do so? Where are things at with that? Or have we removed ourselves? Or just looking at what behavioral changes we've made there and how that is going. So what we just came up with as a group is that it's important to look at the behavioral changes and how they are going, and in conjunction with the symptom changes. And the reason I think it's also important not just look at symptoms is that when we're executing these behavioral changes, there's a lot of pain, initial pain and discomfort and uncomfortableness that comes with putting those changes in place. There's often an increase in stress and anxiety that come with those changes because they're not easy, like boundary setting or leaving a toxic workplace. These all come with stresses, even though they also come with relief and hopefully long-term contentment and recovery and all of that. So if we just measured symptoms, but yet we're making these behavioral changes, like, leaving that work, putting boundaries in place, we could get a skewed result. We could think that, oh, well, we're still burnt out, when actually, we're still experiencing these symptoms, but we're making the improvements. We have put those behavioral changes in place. So I can't stress that enough. Monitor the behavioral changes as well as the symptoms. So hopefully that's making sense there. Hi there, just dropping by in the middle of your episode. I know that is really rude, but I wanted to share with you, because it gets mentioned here and there, my book, When Burnout, Nothing Left to Give, a Psychologist's Path Back from Burnout. This is basically a year's worth of my journal entries that I kept when I was burnt out, and made the commitment to overhaul my life, basically to undo the things that got me there in the first place. So things like perfectionism, achievement focus, people pleaser, no boundaries, very good at helping others, but not very good at allowing help in or taking care of myself. So I've also included wellness practices, so the things that I was doing to help step me forward. So this is my book. It's available on Amazon, but also other online retail bookstores. I will leave the links in the show note. But thank you very much for this intrusion. Now back to your episode. Bye. So the third and final segment that I want to talk about today to help with am I getting better is how to measure. So what ways we can go about this that gives us some reliable information. The first point I want to talk about here is the difference between, not the difference, but there's measures out there that are rigorously scientifically tested to ensure that what they intend to measure, they actually do measure. So in this case, burnout recovery, versus the pop quizzes or, ones that don't. Now, they both have their place, but knowing this as a person out there when you're accessing these measurements is important, because if you're doing one of these pop psychology quizzes, having that awareness that this is not a rigorously scientifically tested tool just allows you to take those results with a grain of salt. Still helpful, but we can just, maybe hold it a little bit more lightly. Now, versus if we were using a scientifically rigorously tested measure, we can have a lot more faith in the results. Now, the tricky thing is that often these rigorously scientifically tested measures, they're not accessible by the public. They're not freely available often. So we, as a public, often need to rely more on those pop quizzes. They're more accessible to us. And there's one that I can think of, that Psychology Central, which is a website that has a lot of great information and quizzes out there. They have one on burnout. And they, in their introduction on it, do indicate what it is and what it isn't, and that it isn't scientifically tested. So they've done their due diligence, but just to know that there'll be some out there that are like that don't do that as well, don't have that understanding. But these more available tests at least give you some sort of idea or screening that, I could be going through burnout, or where you're at in your burnout recovery. So not saying don't use them, but again, just being aware of their, I suppose, limitations. Now, with those scientifically rigorously tested ones, often practitioners like myself, clinical psychologists, we often have access to and have paid to have these tests, these assessments to use with our clients. And just to share with you an example, one of the ones that I use is the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which is one that has been rigorously tested and used. And they have different ones to suit different professions as well, which is really, really useful. So they have a general one, but then they have one for human service industries. So that they've tested it on that group and provided questions that suit more how burnout shows up in that group. So the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which you do need to pay for, and often clinicians like myself will use, it can be very, very helpful to, one, diagnose, but also to measure, is that person getting better as well? So I do use the MBI, as it's called for short. I also use another rigorously tested tool, which is the area of work survey. Now, this one actually looks at the MBI looks at the symptoms of burnout, but AWS looks at the organizational, the factors outside of the client that we know scientifically contribute to burnout. So the AWS, I'm going to think off my feet here, looks at things like workload. It looks at the value match between the person and the workplace. It reward, a community, sense of community, and there's a few others as well. I think there's 6 that they measure. And I use this one because I find it quite informative, especially at baseline, to look at what other factors are contributing to this person's burnout in terms of their industry, workplace. And then using it later on to see how, with the changes that the person's making, whether that's making a difference there. So yeah, there's the AWS. And the last one that I want to mention that's a rigorously tested tool is the professional quality of life scale. Now, this one is designed specifically for health professionals. So I only use it with the clients I see that are health professionals working in the health field. And but also I do believe it's, and I do use for my educational clients as well, so human resources as well, where people are working closely with humans, vulnerable humans. This measure looks at not only burnout, but it looks at compassion, satisfaction. So how satisfied we are with the work that we do. There's my neighbour's dog again. But it also looks at secondary traumatic stress as well. So the vicarious trauma that we're exposed to through witnessing well, not witnessing, but hearing of other people's trauma and the impact that's having on us, which often those, that compassion fatigue, the burnout and secondary trauma are often people working in that field are more at risk of. So I like using that measure particularly, and I don't use the MBI then, for people in those industries. So another useful tool, and that one again is not available and free to the public, is only accessible through paid services. I do believe the public can pay for them, but it can be quite pricey. But you know, again, it's worth it to get reliable measurements for yourself as well. So that one's called ProQual for short. Anyway, we've got our Psychology Central pop quiz, just as an example. And I actually went through it, and the questions are quite, aligned with what we know about burnout. So some useful, even though it's not rigorously tested, some really great ways to sort of explore and see if you may be burnt out, but just a screening measure. And then our scientifically rigorously tested tools like the ProQual, the AWS, and the MBI. And there's many others as well out there too, on both ends of the coins. So there's a couple other ways how to measure as well. Another very useful one that I have a few clients who do, and I did myself as well, is keeping a diary. Mine was more of a journal that I used to help process, like it was part of my recovery. It was part of my behavioral changes to help me get to recovery and beyond. But it was also a useful way to track as well, to see where I'm at and really connect with self and really see where I was at. So it can be more, rather than that journal and really analyzing and reflecting, it can be more of a simple, putting, how irritable you are that day, how exhausted you are that day. So it can be more focused on that and a bit more like a checklist or a rating, and same with those behavioral changes. But that kind of diary tracking can be very useful as well. Again, it helps step out of our tricky brains and really observe. And just a couple of tidbits around this, tips. We really want to employ mindfulness here. And what I mean by that is we want to suspend judgment. We want to be as present as possible, so more regulated, out of our sort of minds that might be pushing us from, anxiety about the future or reflecting or getting stuck in the past, and be in the here and now, really noticing what's showing up, to get a more neutral, more accurate view of where things are at, which can be hard because we're human and we've got a tricky brain. But when you are doing that diary, try and be in the most regulated state that you are, maybe after a walk or after a meditation or something, or something grounding after a meal, rather than, after an argument or while you're, overwhelmed by your future. But yeah, trying to do that diary entry at a time where you feel most calm. So that mind is going to be more of a space to give that mindful reading, more accurate, non-judgmental reading. And the other, like, to help with that, is actually someone else, actually asking, and someone else who is aware of your burnout, is aware of where you're at, someone you share this with, and who observes you on a regular basis. Like, so if you do have a live-in partner, or someone that you see regularly enough who is able and willing to give that non-judgmental feedback as well on how you're going, it's always great to engage them too. And you don't have to take their word for it, but certainly asking and seeing what they are seeing in any changes will be helpful too. And just to give you an example, I did that with my husband when I was going through burnout and going through my recovery. And he would even just sometimes spontaneously tell me what he's noticing changing, but sometimes I would ask as well. And I wouldn't always agree, but it would make me stop and reflect and go, is that true? So yeah, another person can be a great how-to measure as well. And of course, if you're working with a therapist, a coach, or a psychologist, counselor, definitely getting their observations as well, and what they're noticing has changed. If they haven't shared that, check with them, because their observations, not just the measurements they're using, but their observations and what they're seeing has changed behaviorally as well as symptoms, will be helpful too in your answering of that question, am I getting better? So there you have it. We've explored today this question, am I getting better? And well, how to measure that effectively and appropriately. So we've looked at the why. Well, why measure? Why is it important? And we've looked at, well, we have a tricky brain. We don't want to rely solely on our input on that, especially if we're stuck in that stress or that overwhelm and anxiety and low mood. It's good to measure because scientifically we know, and clinically we know, that it helps people with that momentum to keep going, with that confidence that I am getting better, or if things aren't, being able to tweak and change. It helps with that, finding out if you are burnt out and what to target in your recovery as well. And it helps you assess along the way whether what you're doing, what you're putting in, is actually making a difference as well. And if it's not, making some changes to that. We also looked at, what to measure, and the importance that we don't only just want to look at symptoms, which is often what we're, more skewed to do. We want to look at those behavioral changes we're putting in place, not just to deal with our own internal behaviors like boundary setting, or, tending to our emotions or learning to rest, but also looking at those organizational factors as well. And, if it's making a difference, if we've stepped away from work, or we're working part-time, or we've managed to be able to negotiate a role change or reduction in load. So yeah, it's good to see and measure the behavioral changes as well, and whether they're making a difference too. And then we looked at how to measure. So that was the things, like the using pop quizzes versus the scientific, rigorously tested ones, and the importance of knowing the limitations of that pop quiz over the others, but that, they often are more available and easier to get to, and can still be useful as well. But we also looked at other forms of measurement that is accessible to us. So things like diary keeping and journaling, and also, employing our mate, our partners, or whoever knows what's going on, and they can let us know if they're noticing any changes as well. So asking of them too. And of course, your coaches or your counselors or your psychs, whoever you're working with, your doctor, if they've noticed any observable changes too as well. So I'm hoping that this episode has provided, some insight for you to help with your burnout recovery, growth, prevention, or if you're helping others through their burnout journey. please feel free to reach out. Let me know what you thought of the episode. I do love hearing from my listeners, the observers, watchers. But thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now. Me again. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of When Burnout Becomes Reality podcast. I do hope that you have gained some insight, wisdom, or taking away something from this episode that is helpful for you with wherever you're at in your burnout journey or helping others with. Please also reach out. I'd love to hear from the listeners, the viewers, to find out what you're finding helpful, maybe what you still would like to know. So please don't hesitate to follow, subscribe, comment, review, like, shoot me an email. I have my details in the show notes. And if you are in need of services around burnout and you are an Australian citizen, I, in my business, Burnout Psychology Support, do offer group and individual services, telehealth, as well as in-person in Brisbane. So again, check out the show notes. I have my contact details, but the best thing to do is jump on my website at www.burnoutspsychologysupport.com. And just a reminder, of course, to reach out for personalized help. This podcast, whilst we strive to deliver information that can be supportive and educational for you, it is not tailored to meet your personal needs. And burnout is very individualized in terms of what gets us into burnout and what helps support us in getting out. So please do seek professional support. And I think that is it for me to share with you. Thank you once again and take care of you. Bye for now.